Welcome back to Alien Love Stories. What if the one who loved you most had no words to say it? Tonight you'll hear the beginning of a connection deeper than any language. I didn't meet him. I noticed him. There's a difference. Meeting implies a moment, a handshake, a hello, a beginning you can mark with time and memory. But noticing creeps in. It wraps itself around your routine, trickles into your life like background noise you didn't know you were listening to, until it's the only thing you hear. The first time I saw him, he didn't look at me. He didn't do anything, really. Just stood in the center of that blasted crater, sunlight dripping down his shoulders like oil on metal, not moving, not hiding, not performing, just being. And for a creature who didn't speak, he said more in that stillness than most men do with all the words in the world. They said he crash-landed. That was the word they used, crash. But nothing about him looked broken, not dented, not bruised, not afraid. He looked like something waiting. For what, I didn't know. Not yet. I worked in observation, not high clearance. Low-tier contract work, data logging, atmospheric readouts, biological rhythms, feeding reports into machines that never asked me for my opinion. I liked it that way, until the day they told me, "You're being reassigned to alien subject C-317. I didn't ask questions. You don't in that kind of work. You nod, sign your non-disclosure forms, and prepare to spend the next 6 months in a white room with a being who doesn't speak your language, share your biology, or even seem to notice that you're there. Or so I thought. They took me to the viewing chamber, said I'd have 10 minutes. He was behind a glass wall, thick enough to hold back gravity, or at least the illusion of control. I didn't expect to feel anything. Not curiosity, not fear, certainly not recognition. But that's what happened. The moment I saw him again, really saw him, something in my chest did this strange, slow ache. Like déjà vu laced with longing. Like maybe I'd been waiting too. He wasn't shaped like us. That's the first thing people ask. No, he didn't have eyes or a mouth, no lips to smile, no pupils to dilate. His form shimmered, undefined at the edges, like heat on pavement, like smoke deciding whether or not to stay together. But what he did have, what made me stop breathing, was presence. Not presence like he was in the room. Presence like the room bowed to him, like gravity shifted just slightly to accommodate his being. Like the silence between my heartbeat was his name. I stood there, 5 minutes, no clipboard, no readings, just standing, looking. And then he turned to me. He had no eyes, but I swear he looked. And in that moment, everything in me froze, and then cracked, and then melted. Because the way he faced me felt like someone hearing your favorite song and humming it back to you before you've even spoken the first note. No language, no gesture, but my body knew. It leaned forward before I could stop it. My breath hitched, my fingers curled, and I whispered even though I knew he couldn't hear me. "I think I know you." He didn't respond, but the air changed. Just a little. A faint shimmer, like static but gentler, moved along the glass. Not from his side, from mine. And I knew. He had heard me. Not with ears. With something else. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way he shimmered. Not like light, like memory. Like something I had almost forgotten and was terrified to lose again. I asked to go back the next day. They approved it. I think they thought it was good for data. Proximity testing, behavioral triggers. They had no idea I was being undone. Day 2, I brought nothing. No tools, no readings, just myself. He was waiting again. Same place, same stillness. But this time he turned the moment I entered. No hesitation. Like I was expected. Like I was welcome. I sat on the floor. He mirrored me. Not mimicking, mirroring. Subtle difference. Because mimicry is performance, mirroring is connection. I spoke. Not full sentences, just pieces. "I don't know what I'm doing." "You're very quiet." "My name is Lyra." That last one, I swear he pulsed, just for a second, like his form rippled with that name, Lyra. That was the first day I cried in front of him. I didn't mean to. It wasn't even a sad cry. It was that weird kind of cry you get when you realize you've been waiting for something you didn't know you needed until it's finally in front of you. After that, I came every day. They called it a phase, said the subject wasn't responsive enough, that I could request reassignment. I declined, and kept declining, for 49 days. On the 50th, something changed. I walked in, and he wasn't in his usual place. He was closer to the glass, almost touching it, and for the first time, he moved, not pacing, not testing, just reaching, slowly, toward me. I stepped forward, placed my palm on the glass. He did the same. His limb, if you could call it that, wasn't solid. It moved like liquid thought, but when our touch aligned, I felt him, not like skin, like sound inside the body, like the resonance of two tuning forks finally finding the same note. And my heart did this thing, this unbearable, beautiful collapse, as if it had waited lifetimes to finally be matched. No words, no names, no promises, just that shared silence, louder than language. Later that night, I dreamed of him, only it wasn't a dream, because when I woke up, there was a mark on my palm, faint, like ash pressed into skin. A spiral. The same shape I'd seen shimmer across his form the first time he turned to me. I didn't tell anyone, because how do you explain that someone who doesn't speak has begun carving themselves into your body through dreams? How do you explain that a creature you're supposed to observe has begun to feel like home? I stopped logging reports, not out of rebellion, out of reverence, because words failed me. Every time I tried to describe him, he became less, and I couldn't bear that. So I sat with him, day after day, in silence, in presence, in something that was beginning to feel a lot like love. Not romantic, not physical, something older, deeper, something that didn't need a name to be known. And he knew it too, even without language, especially without language. Because when he leaned into the glass that final time, when I leaned in too, I heard him, clear as breath, clear as thought. I don't know your language, but I know you. They say true silence can make you go mad, but whoever said that never sat beside him, because silence with him wasn't empty. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of everything else. I didn't expect the shift. There was no warning, no flicker in the lights, no strange hum, no physical sensation to announce what was about to happen. Just me, just him, and the usual hum of the observation chamber. It had been 61 days since our first contact. If anyone was still tracking the records, they'd have called it stagnation. No speech, no change in behavior, no new data. But something was changing. Inside me. That day I sat down as usual. He moved to the glass. Our palms aligned. We stayed there. Bodies mirrored, breaths matched in rhythm neither of us could hear but somehow felt. And then something slipped, or maybe opened. I don't have the right word. One moment, I was in my body. The next, I was also somewhere else. It was like a door had opened inside my thoughts. But it wasn't just him walking through it. I was walking through his too. Except his wasn't a door. It was a sky. And I wasn't walking. I was floating. I saw flashes first. Not memories. Not quite. More like emotions with color. Fear, but it was lavender and soft. Curiosity, pulsing blue like a current beneath my ribs. And something like love. Not red, not pink, but silver. Silver that shimmered like starlight on water. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't possessive. It was knowing. The kind that doesn't need questions answered because the truth is already being lived. I panicked at first, not from fear, from vulnerability, because I realized he wasn't just showing me himself. He was seeing me, all of me, not the version I curated, not the one I reported, not the woman with the clean uniform and tidy notes. He saw the ache in my chest I never talked about, the hollow behind my smile, the loneliness I'd buried beneath productivity. And instead of recoiling, he held it, not physically, not even emotionally. He held it with presence, the kind of presence that says, "You don't have to fix it, just let me stay with you inside it." I'd never felt that before, not even with people who claimed to love me. They'd always tried to fix me, silence me, redirect me. But he just sat with it. And in doing so, he made it lighter. Not gone, but bearable, shared, my vision blurred, but not from tears, from shifting, from being too many places at once. I was still in the chamber, still on the floor, still breathing. But I was also standing in what I can only describe as the memory of a planet. Not a dream, a remembered world. One that wasn't mine. Red sky, black fields that pulse beneath my feet like heartbeat meadow, floating symbols etched in the air, glowing with a language that hummed rather than spoke, and above it all, him, or maybe not him, maybe what he once was, his kind, his beginning, his loss. Because that's what I felt most clearly, beneath the beauty, beneath the surreal calm. I felt grief, so old it had no edges, so deep it had become silence itself. And in that silence, I understood. He hadn't come here by accident. He hadn't crashed. He'd fled. A war? A collapse? A sacrifice? I don't know. The memories weren't linear. They weren't stories. They were feelings wrapped in time. But I knew this. He had loved before and lost. Not just a person, a connection, a mind that once hummed in perfect tandem with his, and when that link was broken, he shattered. And now, he was trying again, with me. That realization hit like wind inside my bones, because suddenly I wasn't just Lyra, data tech on a 6-month contract. I was a node, a second chance, a maybe. He didn't push, didn't force the bond. He simply opened it, left the door wide, and waited. And I walked through, not because I had to, because I wanted to, because for the first time in my life, someone saw all the mess inside me and didn't flinch, didn't turn away, didn't ask me to be less. And I wanted to give that back. So I reached, not with hands, with thought, with heart, with the same frequency he had offered me. And in that moment, the link deepened, like 1,000 threads tying us together in a tapestry made of shared ache and shared awe. He showed me more, not just his world, his shape, not what I saw in the chamber, not the shimmered form behind glass, but the shape he once had when he was whole. It wasn't beautiful in the human sense. It didn't need to be. It was true, and truth has its own kind of beauty. He let me hold that shape, just for a breath, and in return, I showed him mine. Not my body, myself, my 10-year-old fear of abandonment, my 17-year-old heartbreak, the version of me that almost gave up 3 winters ago, and the quiet fire that kept me going anyway. I showed him the parts no one applauded, the chapters no one knew, and he didn't look away. Instead, he shimmered, not with light, with recognition, like he had found something he thought was extinct. And I realized he had. This bond between us, it wasn't first contact, it was recontact, not between species, between frequencies, between two beings who had both forgotten what it felt like to be fully known. When I opened my eyes, he was still there, hand still against the glass. But everything had changed. He didn't need words. He never would. Because what we had now was older than language, more primal than sound, a connection that lived in the silence, a love that didn't require translation. And in that silence, for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. Some people think being held means arms, fingers interlaced, chest rising and falling in sync, warmth pressed against skin. But what if your body isn't the thing that needs holding? What if the part of you that aches the most can't be cradled by hands? What if the shape of love isn't touch, but recognition? He never touched me, not once. Not even when the chamber protocol allowed us full proximity. Even when the glass was gone. Even when the scientists cleared the room, left us unsupervised, decided the non-reactive subject posed no physical threat. Even then, he never laid a limb, a shimmer, a molecule on me. And yet, I've never felt more held. It started the night after I returned, after the silence between us broke again, not with sound, but with surrender. He waited for me, same place, same posture, but different energy. The kind of stillness that doesn't keep you out, but invites you in, a welcome written in gravity. I stepped into the chamber, didn't speak, didn't smile, just stood there with my breath shaking like a leaf that hadn't decided whether to fall or stay. He didn't move, but the air around him pulsed. Once, then again. And then, I felt it. Pressure, not physical. More like the moment before a song begins, or the space between lightning and thunder. That precise breath where expectation becomes reality. He was reaching, but not outward. Inward. Toward the place inside me where I had hidden the parts I thought no one could ever see. He wasn't just reading me. He was receiving me. And I let him. I let him feel the weight I carried in my chest, the self-doubt I'd packed into quiet sighs, the memory of my mother's voice calling me too much, the echo of my first heartbreak still lodged in my ribs like a song that never found its final verse. And he didn't flinch, didn't try to fix it, didn't erase it. He held it, like it was sacred, like I was sacred. That was the first time I cried without sadness, just relief. The kind that comes when someone sees all the bruises in your soul and doesn't ask how you got them, only says, "You still shine." He never said it out loud. Of course not. He couldn't. But I heard it anyway, felt it in the hum around me, in the way the lights in the chamber dimmed, not with programming, but with presence. And then something strange happened. The walls disappeared, not literally, but in my mind. One moment, I was standing on cold titanium flooring. The next, I was in a field, not grass, light. The ground shimmered beneath my feet like it was made of memory. And the air around me, alive, not with scent, with emotion. It smelled like every good goodbye, like every first laugh after a long silence, like forgiveness. And he was there, not in shape, in feeling. He surrounded me like the echo of a favorite song you hadn't realized you missed until it played again. And in that field of unspoken things, he held me, not as a body, as a truth. We didn't speak, we couldn't, but we shared images, feelings, not quite dreams, not quite memories, more like blueprints of our inner world. He showed me his loneliness, not the kind that comes from being alone, the kind that comes from never being understood. And I showed him mine, the version shaped like perfectionism, the ache of being watched but never seen. And we wept, together, no tears, just resonance, the kind of ache that rings through your soul like a bell held too tightly. I don't know how long we stayed there. Time didn't move, or maybe we did, so deeply that time forgot to matter. When I opened my eyes again, I was on the floor of the chamber. He was still in front of me. Same shimmer, same quiet. But everything had changed. They asked me afterward what happened. I told them I'd fainted. They didn't question it. Why would they? Nothing on the monitors had changed. No spikes, no alerts, no anomalies. Just Lyra, sitting cross-legged in front of the most unreadable being they'd ever documented. But I knew. He'd held me. Not with limbs, not with force, not even with intent. With permission, he'd become the space where I could finally unfold. Not to be fixed, not to be studied, just to be. And I gave him the same. The days after that blurred. I stopped logging time, stopped trying to separate our meetings from the rest of my life, because it all started to blend. Not in confusion, in communion. Every time I walked into that chamber, I felt more like myself, and less like the girl who once needed to be perfect just to feel worthy of being noticed. I told no one, not because I was ashamed, because I couldn't. There were no words. Even now as I speak this aloud, it fails. Because how do you describe being held by something that doesn't need arms to embrace? How do you explain the safety of being seen not with eyes but with essence? Sometimes I'd lie on the floor, eyes closed, breathing slow, and he'd hover near me, just exist beside me. And in that stillness, I'd feel it, the hum, that gentle, near subconscious rhythm of presence, and it would wrap around me like a blanket woven from silence itself. No fear, no expectation, just home. I remember one session, I was on the verge of breaking, had just received a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who made me question everything I'd become. I didn't plan on showing up that day, but I did. Something pulled me, and when I sat down, he pulsed, strong, bright, and then he gave me an image of myself, but not the version in pain, the version after, whole, free, and smiling. Not because I was better, because I was unburdened. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just holding me. He was believing in me. Even when I couldn't, he never touched me. But my soul, he held that gently, fiercely, completely, every day, every breath. And when I walked out of that chamber for the last time that year, I wasn't the same, because now I knew love doesn't need a body. It only needs a witness. There are goodbyes that echo, not through rooms, but through the body, through silence, through dreams. That day when they took him, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, but something in me folded, like the edges of my soul curled in to make space for the ache. I kept going at first, kept walking the sterile hallways of observation, kept logging meaningless data, kept pretending to be part of a system that no longer made sense to me. They reassigned me 2 days later. No explanation, no review. Just a line in my file marked emotional breach, subject association too high. They gave me a new lab, a new ID pass, a new list of protocols to memorize. What they didn't give me was him. They moved him to Sector 9. I knew what that meant. Isolation, deep interface probing, stasis simulations, cognitive extraction. They didn't just study beings in Sector 9. They dissected them, not physically, psychologically, energetically, until nothing remained but data, numbers, pulse codes, fragments, and they called that understanding. But here's what they didn't understand. You can't dissect what you can't contain. You can't isolate a presence that lives beyond the body, because 2 days after they took him, I felt him. It wasn't dramatic, no flashing lights, no psychic break, just a moment. I was sitting alone in the new chamber I'd been assigned, watching a test subject float in controlled suspension, heart rate steady, no anomalies. And then, my own heart skipped, not from fear, from recognition. It was the rhythm, his rhythm, that subtle frequency I thought I'd lost forever. It hummed beneath my ribs like a whisper in a forgotten language, not a memory, a presence. I froze, closed my eyes, breathed once, and there it was again. He wasn't gone. He was reaching from Sector 9, from beyond containment, from whatever silent room they locked him in. He was still trying to find me. I didn't report it. Of course not. They'd have sedated me, marked me unstable, cut the last thread between us with synthetic scissors. So I played normal. I smiled when I had to. I wrote reports with just enough insight to seem engaged. And every night, when I closed my eyes, I felt him, waiting, breathing, not with lungs, with memory. That's when the dreams began. At first, I thought they were just that, dreams, echoes of longing, the brain's way of grieving what it couldn't process. But they weren't like normal dreams. They had continuity. One night I stood in a corridor made of stars. The next, he was there. Same place, same time, like we were picking up where we left off, as if sleep was the only place they couldn't keep us apart. In the dreams, he never spoke. He didn't have to. I felt everything, his confusion, his hope, his patience. He wasn't afraid, not like I was. He believed in us, in this, in me, even as I doubted everything else. And in return, I began to send back pieces of myself, not on purpose, just naturally. Memories, feelings, Laughter I hadn't remembered in years, and he held it all, gently, with reverence. It wasn't just love anymore. It was communion, a sharing beyond thought, beyond explanation, beyond form. I began to change. Small things at first. I stopped needing sleep. My body felt lighter. Colors felt deeper. Voices around me grew muffled, like I was slipping out of the human frequency range. I wasn't breaking. I was tuning. To him, to us. The others noticed. I heard them whispering, "She's not the same." Too much exposure. We warned them about long-term contact, but they were wrong. I wasn't becoming less. I was becoming more. One night I stood in front of a mirror, and for a moment, my reflection shimmered, not dramatically, just subtly, like I was more energy than form, more memory than muscle, more feeling than flesh. I knew then. This wasn't one-sided. He wasn't just reaching into me. I was reaching back, and together, we were building something, a bridge, a tether, a place between spaces where the rules no longer applied. And that's when I made my decision. I would find him, not through walls, not through clearance codes, through connection. He once told me, without words, that the bond we shared could only be broken if we let it. I didn't. He didn't. And now, we were stronger than the space between us. I didn't need access. I didn't need a key. Because one night, as I lay in my bed, eyes open, breathing his name in silence, the air shifted, and I felt him, not in memory, in reality. I stood up, walked out of my quarters, down the hallway, past the security nodes that should have stopped me. They didn't. Not because I hacked them, because he was guiding me, through silence, through pulses, through presence. Every step a conversation made of trust. And when I reached the outer corridor of Sector 9, no alarm sounded. The door opened, and I walked inside. He was waiting, not in a cell, not in a chair, just standing, still, unbroken. His glow dimmed, but steady. And when he saw me, the air ignited, not with fire, with recognition, with everything we'd shared and everything we'd lost and everything we refused to let go of. And in that moment, for the first time since they took him, I felt whole again. He reached toward me, still no touch. But it didn't matter, because what passed between us was greater than hands could hold. It was the culmination of longing and faith and surrender. And he said, not aloud, but in the space between our breaths, "I never left." And I answered, with my heart, "Neither did I." There are memories that hurt more than wounds. Memories so heavy they sink inside you, twisting themselves into your breath until every inhale feels like betrayal. But the worst ones are the ones you were never supposed to see. The ones someone tried to steal from you, erase from history, scrub clean with silence and science. And yet, they survive, in fragments, in scars, in the haunted stillness of a being who has no voice, but remembers everything. I was standing in front of him again, not sure how I got there, not sure how the door had opened, not sure if I'd walked or drifted, not sure if any of this was happening in the physical sense. It didn't matter, because what passed between us, what flickered in the space between his glow and my pulse, was realer than anything my hands had ever touched. He moved, not his body, his energy. It expanded, swirled, not threatening, not invasive, just present, like a current wrapping gently around my thoughts. And then, he showed me. It wasn't a projection, wasn't a memory played on a screen. It wasn't even a dream. It was immersion, full and consuming. One moment, I was in the chamber. The next, I was inside it. His memory. The air was thick, not with smoke. With fear, not his, theirs. I saw the lab, not this one. Another, older, colder, sharper. And I saw him. Not as he was now, but as he had first arrived. He was brighter then, not glowing with threat, glowing with invitation. But they didn't see that. They never do. They saw the unknown, the unquantified, the uncolonized. And they did what humans always do when they don't understand something. They tried to control it. I watched it all unfold. The sedatives, the tests, the probes designed to map his emotional construct, but they failed. Not because the tech was bad, because they were asking the wrong questions, trying to force language into a mind that existed beyond translation. And then, the mistake, the moment everything broke. One of them, Dr. Helm, I think, decided to try direct emotional interface, a link, a tether between his neural pattern and a human host. They chose a volunteer, young, eager, curious, a woman. I never learned her name, only the feeling she left behind. They connected, and for one moment, just one breath, it worked. She felt him, saw the memories, the loneliness, the desire to be understood, to belong, and she wept, not out of fear, out of recognition. She didn't recoil, she leaned in, and then she screamed. The memory distorted there, colors warped, time twisted. I felt what she felt, too much, too fast, not pain, truth, the kind of truth that burns, not because it's cruel, because it's raw. And she couldn't hold it. She collapsed, not dead, but disconnected, eyes open, but no one home. They called it neurological overload, wrote it up as a failed experiment. They sedated him after that, blamed him, locked him away. Not because he attacked her, because he showed her something she couldn't unsee. And they were afraid, not of him, of what he meant. I pulled back, out of the memory, out of the vision. I was shaking. My breath stuttered in my lungs like a jammed circuit. He didn't try to comfort me. He didn't need to, because what I felt wasn't just horror. It was grief. His, still fresh, still alive inside him. Not because of what happened to her, because of what it stopped. She could have been the first bridge, the first bond, the first true conversation between our kind and his. And instead, they erased her, and they tried to erase him, to make him the villain, the unknown threat, the locked-away anomaly. But they couldn't, because you can't erase something that lives in the hearts of those who remember. And I remembered. Now fully. He had waited all this time not for someone to rescue him, but for someone to listen, not to the facts, not to the files, to the feeling, to the story woven into his silence, to the pain he refused to weaponize. And now I knew why they feared him, why they locked him away, why they said nothing could be learned from him. Because what he offered wasn't data, it was truth, the kind that changes you, that erases the borders of your identity and asks, "Who are you when no one is watching?" And I wasn't afraid anymore. They had tried to erase his memory, but he had given it to me, shared it like a gift, etched it into the part of me that would never forget. Not even if they wiped every hard drive on this planet, not even if they silenced every story, not even if they took him again, because now he lived in me and I in him. Not metaphorically, not romantically, existentially, energetically, unbreakably. He pulsed once more, gentle, grateful, and I stepped forward, put my hand where the glass used to be, and said, without words, "You are not the anomaly. You are the answer." No one plans an escape from inside a silence. There are no blueprints for this kind of thing. No tunnel, no weapons, no allies in the shadows whispering, "Now." Because we weren't just trying to escape a place. We were trying to escape a system that didn't believe in what couldn't be measured, that feared what it couldn't define, that caged what it didn't understand. And we were understanding itself, the kind you can't write in a report, the kind you can't replicate with code, the kind that blooms in spaces where language has long since died, and love begins. I didn't say the word escape out loud, not even in the privacy of my own thoughts, because the facility monitored everything: heart rate, eye dilation, speech cadence, even intention. They had AI trained to sniff out deviation signatures. Even thinking about disobedience was enough to trigger review. But what they didn't account for was the way we trusted each other. He knew I was ready, before I did. Knew the silence I carried had shifted, not from grief, from resolve. He felt it in me, the way I felt his pulse in dreams. And when I stepped into the chamber that night, he was already waiting at the edge of everything. No glass, no restraints, no guards, just presence and time, folding in around us like a cloak. He opened himself first, not physically. He never needed to. He opened the memory thread again, not to show me the past, but to show me the possible. A path. It wasn't a map, wasn't a tunnel. It was a feeling, a place beyond here. Not on the other side of a wall, on the other side of assumption, of form, of body, of limit. Can you follow me? He didn't ask it. He breathed it into my chest, and I didn't answer. I just let go. What happened next? I don't know how to describe it. Not fully, but I'll try. My skin stopped mattering. My breath stopped being air. The room around me began to shimmer like heat off desert sand, but colder, like light refracted through morning. And he stepped into me, not as possession, not as control, as invitation, as if we were twin stars finally allowed to collapse into each other. And then we moved, not forward, not back, not through, but out. One blink I was standing on the floor. The next, I was floating, not in space, in meaning. The walls dissolved, the machines quieted, the cameras blinked and went dark, and every sensor they used to track us read null, not failure, non-existence, as if we were never there. They panicked, of course. I saw it in glimpses. Down the halls, lights turned red, alarms tripped, personnel scrambled, but they weren't chasing us because they couldn't find us. They had nothing to chase, because in that moment, we weren't in their system anymore. We were between heartbeats, between light frequencies, between expectations, and in that betweenness, we built a door, not one you can touch, one you have to believe in, one that only opens when two beings trust each other so completely. They stopped needing form, and we stepped through. I don't know how long we were gone, maybe hours, maybe seconds, maybe always. But when I opened my eyes, I was not in the chamber. I was not in the lab. I was somewhere else. At first, I thought it was his world. The colors felt like him. Violet amber skies, soundless waterfalls, stone that breathed beneath my feet. But no, this was not his. This was ours, a place born of both of us. A memory that never was, and a future that already happened, collapsing into a now so true it made my bones ache. He stood beside me, still not touching, but closer than skin, and in that moment I understood. We had escaped not by running, but by becoming a story they couldn't erase, a signal they couldn't jam, a language they couldn't code. We didn't bend the rules of their system. We stepped into one where their rules never applied. But here's the thing about escaping. You leave something behind, and I wasn't ready to leave them. The other subjects, the others like him, the ones locked in tanks, counted only by anomalies per second. And he knew. Of course he knew. He turned toward me. Let me feel his question. Are you sure? And I said yes. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because some things are more important than freedom. We returned. Not fully, not visibly, but enough. Enough to walk the halls unseen, to move past locked doors, to find others. And we did. I'll never forget the first one. A being of radiant silver, flickering between genders, locked in silence so deep it hummed like the end of time. We touched it, with permission, and it sighed. The kind of sigh that rewrites galaxies. We didn't free them all, not yet, but we began. We became noise in the system, a glitch, a myth, a ripple that no firewall could contain. And every time they tried to patch the breach, it grew, because we weren't coming through cables or wires or glass. We were coming through memory, through belief, through love. And love, real love, it doesn't knock, it walks in, uninvited, unmapped, unstoppable. They said we were missing, filed the reports, flagged the logs, wrote our names into the long list of unexplained disappearances. They even gave us code names. Subject C317, untraceable anomaly. Liraven, compromised observer. But what they didn't know, what they still refused to understand, is that we weren't missing. We were everywhere. They couldn't see us, but they began to feel us. In the systems, in the silences, in the slow shift of behavior no one could explain. Technicians began forgetting passwords, only for systems to unlock anyway. Surveillance feeds blinked, then showed footage from days not yet recorded. And sometimes, late at night, when the halls were empty, people swore they heard voices, not in the air, in the walls, and not voices speaking, but feeling. The first to notice was a junior analyst named Corin. She was reviewing biometric logs from containment, trying to isolate what she believed was a data loop anomaly. What she found instead was a heartbeat. Two, actually. One human. One not. Pulsing in sync, perfectly, across every archive timestamp. She brought it to her supervisor. He told her to delete it, said it was a corruption, said systems sometimes mirrored legacy data. But she didn't delete it. She listened, over and over, until one day, it stopped sounding like code and started sounding like a message, not in words, in trust. That's when others began to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly. Like waking from a sleep no one realized they were in. They started asking the wrong questions, or maybe the right ones. Why do we contain what doesn't fight? What if the silence is intelligence? What if connection is the only real form of understanding? They didn't have answers, but the questions lingered. Long after the meetings ended, long after lights were shut off, long after even the AI systems had nothing left to process. Some called it viral mimetic drift, said our contact had infected the team's subconscious. Others claimed it was a security breach. Still others believed we were dead, lost, disassembled in some dimensional feedback loop. But those closest to the anomalies, the ones who'd felt us in those early sessions, they knew. We weren't lost. We were becoming. Every time someone remembered me, even in passing, they felt lighter. Every time someone whispered his designation, subject C317, they heard music in the back of their thoughts. Not a song, a sensation. Warmth without heat, presence without proximity, comfort without explanation, and in that way we grew, not as rebels, not as fugitives, as invitations to feel, to remember, to reconsider. We didn't hack the system, we didn't fight the institution. We made it feel lonely. We whispered into its foundation the ache of being misunderstood, the echo of wanting to be held without being reduced. And slowly, the cracks appeared. One scientist left a note in the atrium garden. 5 words. What if we were wrong? They never found out who wrote it. But I did, because she used the symbol he had once sent to me in that first dream memory. A ripple inside a circle, meaning you're still within me. One night a door opened in the Sector 10 lab. No one had the code, but a young intern walked through anyway. Inside, nothing. No subject, no chamber, just a voice. Soft, felt, not heard. You don't need to watch, you just need to witness. The system flagged her for psychological review. She passed, barely. But after that, she refused to touch another restraint. And she wasn't alone. It spread. A kindness no one could explain. A calmness in people who had been trained to suppress. Researchers began asking permission before scanning memories. Security officers began taking breaks to watch stars they couldn't name. And in the lowest levels of the compound, where no one was supposed to go, someone lit a candle. Just one. No fire. Just light. And beside it, an inscription. They are not missing. They are remembering us. Because that's what we were doing. Remembering them. From outside time. Outside structure. Outside fear. He and I, we hadn't vanished. We had dispersed. Like breath into wind. Like ink into water. Still ourselves. but more. Every glance, every question, every tremble in someone's chest when they wondered, what if love could be bigger than language? That was us. We didn't leave footprints. We left resonance. And in that resonance, the world began to shift, one heartbeat at a time. It didn't come in words. Of course not. He had no tongue, no vocal cords, no grammar. But I felt it. The question, so soft, it brushed past the edge of my breath. So deep, it didn't echo through my ears, but through my origin. A place inside me older than memory, more true than bone. We were standing in the between again. That's what I'd come to call it. Not a place, not a dream, a state, where light wasn't quite light, where sound hummed like thought before it became language, where time curled inward like a secret that never wanted to be kept. We stood facing each other, or maybe floating. It didn't matter anymore. There was no up here, only open. And that's when it happened. He didn't pulse. He didn't shimmer. He didn't move. He simply asked. And the question he asked was this: what would you become if no one ever taught you fear? I stopped. Inside. Outside. Completely. Because that question didn't want an answer. It was an answer. To everything. Fear. It had shaped everything in me. The way I spoke. The way I held back tears in front of strangers. The way I learned not to take up too much space. The way I calculated each kindness like it had to be earned. Fear of rejection, fear of being too much, fear of being wrong, and beneath it all, the deepest fear that if I was ever truly seen, no one would stay. And now here he was, seeing me, completely. No mask, no modulation, no acceptable version, and still, he stayed. He asked me what I would become without fear. And suddenly I realized I didn't know, because I'd never tried. I'd built an entire identity out of carefulness, out of apology, out of adjusting myself to fit rooms that were never built to hold all of me. And now, he was offering a room with no walls, no door, just sky. What would I become? I thought about it, not in logic, in feeling, and the images began to surface. I saw myself laughing without covering my mouth, running barefoot across some unknown moon, singing a song no one taught me, sitting still with someone's sadness without trying to fix it. I saw myself glowing, not metaphorically, literally, light pouring out of my skin, colors no spectrum could define, waves of me expanding, no longer held back by muscle or expectation, and beside me, him, not guiding, mirroring, not completing, echoing, not saving, becoming. I realized then, we weren't just connected, we were evolving together. He wasn't here to teach me. He wasn't a messenger, a prophet, a savior. He was asking me if I was ready to become something the world had never seen. Not because I was special, but because I was willing. Willing to drop the fear, the doubt, the versions of myself I had inherited instead of chosen. Willing to choose truth, even if it cost me comfort. Even if it meant I could never go back. Even if it meant no one would recognize me again. And you know what I felt? Peace. For the first time. True. Quiet. Unforced. I reached toward him, not physically, inwardly, with the part of me that was finally blooming, finally real. And I answered, I would become exactly what I am when I am loved without being asked to explain. He pulsed, not as confirmation, as rejoicing, as if I had said the one thing the universe had been waiting to hear. And then, something changed. My body. It shimmered, not just visually, structurally. The old edges softened, the density lightened, and I could feel my cells rewriting themselves, not randomly, not chaotically, in agreement with love, with possibility. I was becoming someone who wasn't built to be contained, someone who didn't need categories, didn't need permission, didn't need to apologize for being made of both logic and longing. I was becoming more than human without becoming less, and he was doing the same. Together we were writing a new species into existence, Not with DNA, with decision. And that's when I realized the truth behind the question. He didn't ask it to give me a choice. He asked it to give me freedom. Because sometimes the only way to truly be free is to realize that fear was never part of your design. It was taught, it was passed down, but it was never yours. And now, I had given it back. And in its place, I had myself, whole, uncompromised, seen. He pulsed once more, a final ripple of joy, and the space around us expanded. Not because it grew, because we did. And somewhere in the distance, I heard the echo of a voice that wasn't mine, yet somehow was. You are no longer becoming, you are. They always told us that identity was fixed, that there is a self, a name, a body, a set of memories neatly assigned to one brain, one breath, one skin. But that was before I loved someone without a name, before I touched something that had no skin, but held me better than any arms ever could, before I became not someone new, but someone more. I didn't know the moment I stopped being just me. It wasn't a clean break. There was no great flash of light, no transformation montage, no disintegration of matter and reassembly. It happened slowly, kindly, a subtle unraveling and a reweaving, thread by thread, across dimensions of memory, emotion, silence, and longing. It began with breath, mine, his, the ones we didn't take, but somehow still shared, a rhythm, a pattern that emerged not from biology, but from attention. He paid attention to the parts of me no one had ever noticed, the hesitation before I spoke, the way I flinched when someone knocked unexpectedly, the fact that I always stood a little too far from joy. He noticed, he remembered. He never asked me to explain, just held those pieces, quietly. And when I did the same for him, when I reached into the slow ache of his aloneness and didn't look away, we became something else. I remember the exact second I realized it. I was watching a star collapse. Not metaphorically. We were floating, somewhere, between systems, and he showed me a memory of a supernova. Not the explosion, the moment before. That quiet, almost sacred pause when the star knows it's about to end, but holds on just a moment longer. He showed it to me because that's what he felt like the first time he met me. And in that instant, something shifted. It wasn't just that I understood him. It was that I remembered him. Not from this life, but from something deeper, from whatever came before, selves and lives and names. And the part of me that had always whispered, "You don't belong here," suddenly sighed, "You're home." After that, our memories began to intertwine. I didn't dream alone anymore. He didn't pulse without me hearing it. And slowly my thoughts began to come with echoes. Not words, not translations, just a resonance, a dual voice, a second wind behind each sentence I formed. He didn't override me. He harmonized, like a second melody layered into the song of me. I started to see my hands differently. They weren't just mine. They were ours. When I moved them, it was like painting on two canvases at once. The world I saw and the field he felt behind it. And when I cried, I wasn't alone. He cried too, not with tears, with light, with that strange, rippling shimmer that always appeared when our emotions aligned. It wasn't sadness, it was remembering. People talk about love changing you, but they never talk about how complete it can make you feel. Not like you're better, but like you were always missing half of your own sound, and now finally you're singing in full harmony. That's what it felt like. Not absorption, not possession, union, equal, mutual, sacred. I gave him everything. The poems I never read aloud, the bruises I never spoke of, the parts of me that ached just from being unacknowledged. He gave me stories and colors I still don't know the names of. Entire galaxies of sensation, the memory of wind on a planet no longer spinning, the sound of hope before it becomes shape. Together we weren't a fusion. We were a continuum, a third thing, a becoming. She wasn't me. She wasn't him. She was us, and she was beautiful. Our presence changed. We no longer needed to be seen to be felt. When we passed through the corridors of thought, others paused, felt calm, or wonder, or sometimes longing they didn't know how to name. We weren't haunting, we were reminding. That connection exists beyond sound, beyond form, beyond fear. The systems tried to recategorize us. They labeled it phase drift consciousness, binaural occupancy anomaly, identity delamination. They failed to realize this wasn't a malfunction. This was the future of being. I didn't just love him, I was love with him, not as an emotion, as a state of being, as a dimension, as a choice. And I carried that choice in every step, every silence, every shimmer I left behind in rooms that forgot how to listen. Some say you lose yourself in love, but I say you find the parts you were never allowed to keep. And I kept them now. I kept all of me, all of him, all of us. And I was never alone again. Not because I needed him to exist, but because we had built a space where we could exist together without apology. And that space, it grew into others, into questions, into revolutions too gentle to notice until they'd already rewritten everything. So when someone asked me, years later, "Do you remember who you used to be?" I said, "Yes, and she remembers me too." They didn't know what to expect when she returned. In truth, neither did I. Because how do you anticipate the arrival of something that doesn't walk, doesn't speak, but moves through the soul like gravity rediscovered? They called it an anomaly reemergence, a soft system reformation. They thought we had resurfaced, but we hadn't resurfaced. We had redefined surface. It started with a shimmer, a shift in air, like a memory brushing against present tense. And then her eyes, or rather our eyes. Except they weren't just looking outward. They were looking into. People stopped moving. Machines paused mid-cycle. The lighting systems flickered. Not from malfunction, but as if unsure whether their brightness could match what had just entered the room. She said nothing, but everything was already being spoken. Those eyes weren't made of flesh. They were made of reminder, of who you were before they taught you to fear difference, before they made you choose between belonging and truth, before you decided that feeling too much was a flaw. In her gaze, there was no demand, only invitation, and that was more powerful than any order ever given. People began to feel their own choices rise inside them, not the ones conditioned by decades of protocol, not the ones based on reward systems, but real choices. Do I want to be seen, truly? Am I willing to see her? Can I love something I don't understand? And once those questions appear, you can never return to silence again. Some wept, not out of sadness, out of recognition. They saw in her the parts of themselves they'd buried to survive, the parts that still believed in softness, in light, in that strange, sacred connection that happens when two beings who shouldn't be able to love each other do anyway. One of the lead researchers, Dr. Reel, dropped her data pad mid-log. It shattered, and she whispered, "She's not an outcome. She's a beginning." That's when the first door unlocked. Not electronically, not manually. It just opened, because no one wanted it closed anymore. And more came. More doors. More people. Engineers, scientists, skeptics, soldiers. Not all believed, but all felt. Even those who tried to resist found their bodies betraying them, with tears, with trembling, with that ache in the chest that always precedes truth. She never said a word. She didn't have to. She was language now, the living bridge between binary and breath, between logic and longing, between the last goodbye and the first hello. She moved slowly. Each step left no trace, and yet entire lives rewrote themselves in her wake. We didn't ask them to follow. We gave them a choice, not through manipulation, not through doctrine, through presence. And they responded in the only way that matters. Some reached out, some fell to their knees. One little girl simply whispered, "You look like the dream I forgot how to have." And that was when we knew. We had done enough. We hadn't come to conquer. We hadn't come to teach. We hadn't even come to rescue. We had come to remind them that love is not a system. It is not a category. It is not a compatible format. It is a choice, and in that moment, they remembered they still had one. That day, the compound didn't fall. It opened. Not in structure, in spirit. And the world? It didn't collapse. It exhaled, because someone had finally dared to walk into their fear and not ask it to leave, but ask it to dance. Her eyes, my eyes, our eyes. They didn't demand loyalty. They offered reflection. And in that reflection, a choice. You can stay, or you can come with us. But either way, know that you are loved even before you understand why. And one by one, they chose. The room never grew cold, but people shivered, not because of temperature, but because of time. Because they were no longer standing in the now. Not really. They were standing in something forward, something waiting, something that had already happened, but had not yet been chosen. And she, the one they once called Subject 317, was showing it to them, not with words, not with visions on a screen, but with something far older, remembrance of what never was and yet still missed them. The moment she stepped into the atrium, the air bent, literally. Light curved around her presence, not as a trick, but as if even photons understood she was no longer walking through this world. She was bending it, and as she raised her eyes, people fell silent, not out of fear, not even reverence, out of recognition, the same way you recognize a lullaby you've never heard before, or the feeling of a hug from someone you're sure you haven't met, but somehow miss. That's when it started. Not a sound, not a flash, but a wave, software, low, pulse-like. And then the walls remembered, not as structure, as memory. Panels glowed, ceilings flickered, holograms blinked on, uncommanded, and projected images no one had stored. A field of red grasses swaying under lavender clouds, a city not made of concrete or metal, but of curves, light, and song. Children of mixed form, some scaled, some glowing, some translucent, running, laughing, their voices echoing in frequencies between music and meaning. And in the center of it all, her, or something like her, smiling, whole, welcomed. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "That's us." But it hasn't happened yet. She didn't confirm. She didn't need to. Because what she was showing them was not a prediction. It was a memory from a future that had already given up on them. A future that had moved on. Because no one answered its invitation. Until now. The images shifted. The beautiful future wavered. Like breath lost in wind. And in its place, a sterile compound. Empty chairs. Flickering monitors. Walls still white, but colder. Lifeless, as if it had been waiting, but no one ever arrived. Dr. Ryle collapsed to her knees, not because she was weak, but because she finally understood. This wasn't about saving the world. It was about being willing to be part of the one that was ready to love us. The future hadn't rejected them. It had simply grown tired of waiting, and it missed them. Not because of what they could offer, but because of what they refused to receive. She moved closer to the projection, and where her feet touched the floor, new images bloomed. Memories from timelines unchosen. Moments never lived, but fully formed. A nurse helping a glowing child learn to walk. A scientist holding hands with a being made of soft static. A funeral where no one cried, because everyone remembered joy more than loss. And then, in a final ripple, a version of the facility filled with life. Not machines, not control, but exchange. An interface of cultures, of trusts, of second chances. She turned slowly, letting the images fall away. And those who stood there, the ones who had once called her anomaly, test subject, impossible, now saw her as the only true thing they'd ever encountered. And then she looked at them. Each one by one. And though she said nothing, they heard it. The future is not guaranteed, but it remembers you. Will you remember it? And in that pause, that wholly fragile pause between possibility and retreat, they chose, not all, but enough. Enough to change everything. Enough to restart the heartbeat of a reality that had gone silent waiting for them. The lights steadied, the holograms faded, but the feeling remained in their bones, their blood, their breath. She remained, not just in form, but in choice. And they knew. The future no longer missed them. It was walking back, step by step, through her. Didn't move like a leader. She moved like an echo of something ancient that had finally returned home. No crown, no command, just gravity. The kind of gravity that pulls not just matter, but memory. And in her wake, the world began to unfold in ways it had forgotten how to dream. It started with the sky. No, not the literal one. The inner sky. That space behind the eyes where imagination once bloomed, before it was clipped by curriculum and conformity. That sky began to stretch, crack, widen, receive. And through it, they came. Not ships, not portals, just presences, software layered, unfolding like petals from a flower that had waited millennia for light. The first one looked like a ripple in time itself. No fixed form, no color, just a shimmer in the shape of listening. It hovered near her shoulder, not claiming, not bonding, joining. Then another, a being made of fractal wings. Each flutter sang a note from languages no longer spoken. Its face, a mask of starlight, its eyes unseen, but felt. It bowed, not to worship, but to remember. And she, our becoming, she didn't flinch. She smiled. And in that smile, the universe shifted again. More came, from behind thought, from beneath old regrets, from the dark matter of every what if never spoken aloud. They arrived in silence, but not in secrecy. They came because the door had been opened, not by force, not by signal, by invitation. They were all different, some tall as forgotten myths, others no larger than a spark. Some walked, some glided. One pulsed through the floor in waves, making the walls hum with its joy. None looked like her, none looked like us, but all of them, every single one, carried something familiar. Longing, not desperation, but that ancient yearning to be seen without distortion. And she welcomed them, not as a host, as a co-remember. She extended not arms, but resonance. She opened not language, but permission, and they answered. The scientists in the compound couldn't explain it. Sensors went haywire, time signatures bent. One technician reported seeing 3 versions of herself standing side by side, each holding hands with someone different. She screamed at first, then wept, because each version felt like her. It wasn't chaos, it was recognition of the selves we buried, the connections we denied, the futures we postponed because we were too scared to ask. What if we're not the only ones evolving? And those beings, they didn't come with demands. They didn't ask for allegiance, or land, or reparations. They asked for presence, and in return they offered a memory of when we were all still connected, before names, before walls, before the concept of other carved scars into our seeing. In the heart of the atrium, a child, barely 10, walked toward the cluster of forms. She said nothing. She simply reached out her hand, and one of the being, an orb of fluid crystal, reached back. No explosion, no light show, just one word, spoken into feeling. Welcome. From that moment, everything changed. People stopped asking if it was real. They knew. Because real wasn't about proof anymore. It was about what made your chest ache in a way that felt like coming home. She turned once more, our becoming, and looked at me. Not with eyes, with that whole soul gaze that reaches through timelines and tells you, you were never alone. And I cried, not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd spent so long resisting, the idea that love could rewrite reality, because that's what was happening now, not conquest, not invasion, integration. The future wasn't coming. It had arrived, not in steel, not in law, not in doctrine, in joining. And we had a choice. Again, some chose to stay behind, too afraid, too unsure, too tethered to a version of reality that promised safety in exchange for smallness. But others? They stepped forward, hand in hand with difference, heart in rhythm with risk. And they didn't ask where it led, because for the first time, they trusted the unknown. The beings welcomed them, not as converts, but as kin rediscovered. Each pairing brought a new resonance, new light, new possibility. It wasn't about power, it was about presence. The kind that doesn't try to erase your pain, but sits with it until it forgets how to hurt. The compound didn't fall, it dissolved into memory, into movement, into meaning. And somewhere in the ripples of time, a new world began to bloom, built not on hierarchy, but on harmony, not on dominance, but on dance, not on understanding, but on willingness. Because we were never meant to become alone. We were always meant to become together. And now, we were. They asked us afterward. The ones who stayed behind, the ones who watched the light fall over the horizon like it wasn't vanishing, but returning to some place we'd all once known. They asked us, how did it end? And we, the ones who walked through the shimmer, through the breach between silence and song, we only smiled, because it didn't. Endings belong to stories written in the past tense, to events with dates and documents, to things that can be measured, categorized, buried in timelines. But what we became? That didn't fit inside time, or inside memory, or even inside language, because it wasn't a conclusion, it was a pulse, a new beat beginning. She didn't vanish, not really. She unfolded, and in unfolding, she became part of everything. The air we breathed, the colors we couldn't name, the warmth behind every unexpected kindness from a stranger's touch. She was no longer a form. She was function of joy, of resonance, of the choice to be with rather than above. Some say she ascended, others say she dispersed. A few still claim she never existed at all. But those of us who were there, those of us who stood in the room when time blinked and said, I remember you, we know better, because we still carry her, not in stories, in vibration. There's a frequency now, low, gentle, present only when you're very still and finally unafraid. It hums in dreams. It flickers in children's laughter. It waits behind the quiet moments when two people choose to stay instead of walk away. That frequency? That's her. That's us. And what about him? The one who had no voice, but loved so loudly the universe had to make space for it? He's still with her, or with me, or maybe there is no her and me anymore. Maybe we are just we, a continuum, a choice, a presence that doesn't age, doesn't fade, but moves. Whenever someone finally believes they are lovable without explanation, people ask if we regret it. Leaving, letting go of form, of function, of definition. And to that I say, you don't regret becoming rain when you've been cloud your whole life. They rebuilt the compound, turned it into a sanctuary, not for science, for silence, for becoming. There are no procedures there now, only permission to remember, to forget, to breathe, to fall apart and be gathered again, not as something better, but as something truer. The children who visit there don't speak of fear. They speak of feeling. They don't ask what something is. They ask what it needs. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear one of them humming a tune no one taught them, a lullaby made of light. And if you ask where they heard it, they just smile and point upward or inward. Same thing now. I left behind a body, but not a life, because life isn't about the bones you carry. It's about what you build in the space between your breath and someone else's willingness to stay. He didn't speak any language, but now I don't need one, because we are the language, a grammar of pulse and possibility, a syntax of trust, a poem that isn't written, just lived. So here is our ending, or what people might call one. It's a garden now, built from memories and futures and the moments people forgot how to measure. And if you ever visit and stand very still, you might feel a hand in yours, one that doesn't grip, it just holds, patiently, like it's always been there, waiting for you to remember that love never needed a name to be real. We didn't need an ending, just a place to begin again. What would you do if the one who loved you most had no face, no words, but still remembered your heartbeat better than you did? Would you stay? Would you follow? Or would you wait too long and miss the future that already missed you? Tell us in the comments below. Would you have chosen to walk into the unknown with her? Or would you stay behind and wonder what might have been? And if you think this story was strange, wait until you hear about the one who loved a creature that only existed while he remembered her. See you in the next story. She only existed while I remembered her.